It's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think. Jamil and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters.
Greetings, Cretans. Good to see y'all.
Good to, I mean, the only people we see is you and me.
Yeah, that's true. But,
so, you mean y'all, you mean me?
Y'all and the other people that are very vicariously there with you as well.
Yes. That would be nice. That would be nice. Very nice. Very nice.
Is Heretic hopping these days? Lots of walk-in customers, or
we are hopping. If by hopping you mean are we
dry hopping?
Yeah. Are we hopping our beers? Yes. We definitely are hopping, so to speak. How's things down at the Palmer Refuge? Did you get your deck finished?
No. I guess I would say I'm probably 60% done.
Well, you're just like the election. You're about 60% done.
Yeah. And metaphors aside, it's coming along pretty well.
Very good. Nice to hear.
Yeah.
Getting your.
It's it's always a process. As soon as you take apart one, aspect, like the stairs, for example, you find wood underneath the stairs that needs to be replaced. It's like, I got to do this first, and then I'll come back and do this. It always takes longer, much longer than you figured.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
Anytime you start cracking open anything in your house, there's a whole another nest of God knows what to be taken care of.
That's for sure.
Similar to speaking of God knows what, or a nest.
We were thinking the same thing.
You thinking of our good friend John Blickman?
Yes, indeed. There is a can of worms. Or a mind in search of a problem.
There's a mind that is. Are you saying John Blickman's mind is equivalent to a can of worms?
Lots of activity. Yes, very much.
Lots of squishy bits, I imagine.
Yeah.
If you were to crack open his skull, it would feel very much like a can of worms, I would imagine.
I imagine so, yeah.
I have not felt, I take that back. I have felt brains before. So, they don't really feel like a can of worms. But, there you go, I suppose.
But he is always thinking of new problems to address, new inventions to solve these problems and make your brew day easier. So that's why we like him, among other things.
And he's just a hell of a guy.
Yeah.
Yes. The wonderful Mr. John Blickman and Blickman Engineering has been paying for this show, so you don't have to for these many decades.
Yes.
So the very least you can do is check out BlickmanEngineering.com, all the cool stuff there. And next time you're down at your homebrew shop, when they probably have some Blickman gear there, check it out. See what stuff they got there, and maybe send a nice email to John, feedback@BlickmanEngineering.com. Tell him how much you enjoy the show, and you appreciate that he's paying for it. And that way, Mr. Palmer and I get to continue doing these things.
We wouldn't see each other if it wasn't for this show.
That is quite true. Considering how much time we have hung out, I think we've certainly spent a lot more time together virtually, shall we say? Our
schedules these days makes it difficult to actually get
Yes.
together in person. But
Yes. Our love is no less for the distance. Yes. Yeah. Today, we were going to talk about stratification in fermentation. So one of the interesting things is that, especially in commercial brewing, when you'll have larger tanks, you will do multi-batches into a tank to fill them. And generally you pitch your yeast on the first batch and then you fill it up the rest of the way. And then filling it up the rest of the way can take the rest of the day. It can take a couple of days, depending on the size of the tank and the size of your brew plant. And for us here at Heretic, we have tanks that take 4 turns of the brew plant to fill up.
Wow.
And depending on the day, sometimes that's all done in one day. Sometimes that's done, a couple of batches one day, a couple of batches the next day. And what's interesting is that it is possible for there to be a stratification of the worts, and for the 2 beers to essentially ferment separately. And John has a ton of interesting information about this based on some work that was done by
Dave Capral.
There you go. So why don't you start off, John, by telling us, what is it? What is this problem?
Okay, well, you outlined it quite well. Stratified fermentation is 2 separate, at least 2, and distinct fermentations occurring in the same vessel at the same time. Mm-hmm. Now, these 2 fermentations are typically layered, one on top of the other, and separated by a boundary zone. And these fermentations will have different densities and or different temperatures and or different cell counts because they are occurring separately. Mm-hmm. And then later on, these 2 fermentations will eventually merge turbulently into a third homogeneous fermentation that generally doesn't meet the normal specification for that beer. Mm-hmm. So it is it's a very interesting problem that typically only affects commercial brewers where they're doing multiple brews to fill a fermenter. Doesn't happen really at the homebrew level. Even if you're doing 2 brews to fill a fermenter, the scale of our fermentations, 5-10 gallons, is small enough that you usually don't get stratification.
I would imagine there's a potential problem for it even on the homebrew scale, because I've come across homebrewers that have like 1 barrel fermenters, and they will brew, they'll have a 10 barrel, or 10 gallon brew kit, and they'll brew into it 3 times. And they'll do very similar to what they see commercial brewers doing, which is pumping in the bottom.
Yeah.
And, the thought being, well, pumping it in the bottom, it must stir it up and mix it. How is it possible that it's not? So why exactly is this occurring?
Well, it's occurring, one, because, as we said, multiple brews to fill that larger fermenter. And it occurs primarily because there is a lack of mixing of the 2 worts. Mm-hmm. So now there are a number of factors that promote the incidence of stratification. It doesn't always happen, but it can. And these factors are, 1, the addition of a fresh, unyeasted wort to an active fermentation. And you do that when you add all of your yeast to your first brew in the multi-brew fermenter. If there is a low fill velocity of the second or third worts, you can get, and depending on the geometry of the fermenter, you can get essentially all of the initial wort and the initial fermentation raising up as it is slowly displaced from the bottom, creating these 2 distinct layers. Now, it is often the case that the initial fermentation is a couple of degrees warmer, and depending on the amount of time that has gone by, it could be a couple gravity points lower in density. So both of these things help allow that cooler, heavier wort to displace and move the first wort without actually mixing in, especially if that fill velocity is slow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. When we're doing multiple batches, as perfect a brewery as we are,
right,
there's times when, you may be knocking out the second batch and it's, going a little slower or colder. And if it's going slower for some reason, it tends to be colder because if you're not adjusting everything else on your heat exchanger and your cooling method, you'll end up with cooler wort. But well, that's okay. Not a big deal. A couple of degrees, it'll blend together. It'll be fine. And then what you don't realize is that you're setting yourself up with this problem. Yeah. Let's do this. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll have more about stratification in fermentation right after this.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking about stratified fermentation, which you wouldn't think would be as much of an issue as it is. But what I can tell you is we've actually experienced that problem here at Heretic. And, we didn't know what it was. But what we noticed was on some fermenters, just kind of randomly, and it tended to be after, first my guys were like, no, the solenoids are sticking open. We have motorized ball valves that open and close to run the glycol down. They're like, that's not working, and it's sticking open, and it's chilling down the beer, just randomly overnight. And I'm like, well, that's not happening because I see the ball valves are operating. If they get stuck, they get stuck, they burn out. And so the other thought was, okay, well, maybe it's, a problem with the sensor. They're like, the sensors are off. And, so we check with another probe, we check various points. We're like, no, the sensor's on, everything's good. So, with that, we're like, what pattern? So I'm like, look, we need to write down every bit of information, about this. What's happening, what tanks, what time, what beer was in there. And what we started to learn was it was when we were filling the tanks all the way up. If we, had, just a couple of batches in there, no problem. When we filled them all the way up, then we started getting an issue. And they're like, well, it's because of this, that. I'm like, nah, it has something to do with, and, we figured out, it's got to be something with the mixing. But what we experienced was, all of a sudden the fermentation, the beer would drop. So the probe, it tends to be on the bottom part of the tanks. That's how everybody sets up their tanks, because if you're not filling it all the way, which you don't have to, you need that probe, covered. And so you tend to put the probe in the lower half or the lower third of the tank, with the thought being that everything's mixed nicely And so doesn't matter, and fermentation will mix it up. And it'll keep it nice and mixed because there's a lot of activity. If you've ever looked at a fast carboy, you see how turbulent a fermentation is.
Yeah.
And so, brewers rely upon that. And I had never been, this has been discovered, 10 plus years ago, right? 12 years ago, this paper was written. And I had never heard of this. I had never been told this. I had never heard of it from any other brewer. And so, we kind of came to it ourselves. We're like, wow, this got to be what's happening. And it will also impact the yeast and, the total fermentation. Sometimes you get, and that's one of the things I wonder about this, if it's also possibly, strain related in a way. Are there certain strains, are more likely to experience this or not?
It seems likely. I don't know. That's a really good question.
Well, how exactly is this occurring? What is happening here? Outline it for us in your engineering way that we get a vision of exactly what's happening inside that tank we can't see into.
Sure. Well, I might as well preface this and say that the majority of the information for today's show comes from a Master Brewer's Technical Quarterly article titled Stratified Fermentation, Causes and Corrective Actions by David Capral. And this was published in volume 45, number 2 from 2008. So that being said, he outlines 5 stages of the stratified fermentation that occur. And I think this helps lay it out pretty well. In stage 1, we are adding the new wort. And this new wort displaces the actively fermenting wort instead of mixing with it.
So you've already, we'll use, for example, at Heretic, we've got these 120 barrel net. They're 147 barrels gross. Our brew plant puts out about 37 barrels per turn. So we get in cold into the fermenter, maybe 32 barrels. We put the first batch in there and add the yeast. And then, some 4 hours later, we add another batch. And then we add another batch. And then we add another batch until the thing's full. So you're saying, we've added that first batch. And in a lot of breweries, it's very common to not be able to turn as quickly.
Yeah.
And as we do here, especially if you're like a 2-vessel brewery. And I've encouraged a lot of my friends to put in multi-size tanks. Sorry if I go off on a tangent here.
No worries.
But I've encouraged a lot of my friends to put in multi-size tanks, because, when you're starting out, you could brew, one batch. Let's say you have a 15-barrel brewery. Mm-hmm. Buy 30 barrel or 45 barrel fermenters, because you could brew a 15 into there when you're getting started. And then when all of a sudden people want a ton of that beer, you could double batch into it. And, it generally takes the same amount of space. It generally just costs a little bit more money to get the larger tank, which pays for itself. And, after you use it once.
Yeah.
So, I've encouraged them to do that, but a lot of them will have just, 2-vessel brew plants where it's just the mash lauter, combi mash lauter, and combi kettle whirlpool. And so it's difficult for them to do 2 turns in a day.
Yeah.
And for us, we have 4 vessels, so we can mash while the lauter is full. And, and the lauter is going into the kettle, and then, as it's going to the whirlpool, the mash goes into the lauter. So it cuts the amount of time it takes to turn another batch, because we can be doing other things while we're in that process. Anyways, so on these breweries with just two vessels and double batching, they'll usually batch the second day to fill that tank.
Okay.
And in that second day, we know what happens when, they're all my friends are pitching good amounts of yeast, healthy yeast. They're getting fermentation going. The growth is there. It's already started fermenting, and they pump in that next wort. it's already dropped several degrees Plato probably. The just having the yeast present changes the osmotic gradient of the liquid, right? And
Right.
it's probably warmer than what they're pumping in.
Yep.
So anyways, you're talking about the first thing is adding cold wort underneath the
actively fermenting wort. Yes.
Okay.
And that's what exactly as you described perfectly. It's displacing it instead of mixing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so now the other thing that happens is that this new wort picks up a low cell count from interaction with the actively fermenting wort. Something on the order of only about 5 million cells per milliliter, cell count, which is low.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, after 12 hours, you'd be looking for something in the 20 to 40 million cells per mil range.
Mm-hmm.
And this new low cell count fermentation is occupying the bottom part of the fermenter where it covers that temperature probe and sampling port. So you're measuring this second fermentation now when you do samples. And then there is this a stratification boundary zone that is separating the two fermentations, kind of like a no man's land or boundary layer that is the division.
Mm-hmm. And it's like salt water and fresh water. There's like a halocline where it'll one will sit on top of the other and won't mix. You get a little fuzzy layer there, but it's because the two have different densities, they will not mix, and even just temperature alone can cause that. If you ever seen black and tan.
Oh yeah.
That's a good example of what's happening.
Yeah, that's a very good example. Okay, so we've done stage one. We've created this stratified fermentation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in stage two, these two worts will ferment separately for a period of time, approximately 18 to 30 hours after fermenter full, or after that last infusion. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
So remember the bottom layer is what's covering the probe and driving the cooling system. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that lower fermentation is what's driving the system. And it therefore drives how long those fermentations are going to remain separate. We tend to have that lower fermentation tends to be a little bit cool. It tends to ferment slowly because of the yeast cell count. So only a small amount of cooling is necessary to maintain your set temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows the upper layer to kind of run away.
Right.
That upper layer has been actively fermenting. There's not much cooling being applied to the tank.
It's fermenting hot.
Yeah, it gets exothermic. And its temperature gets to be about 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit above the set point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fermenting quite well, really dropping in density.
And not at all the way you want it to happen.
Yeah.
Temperature control is critical to beer flavor, the proper fermentation.
Yeah. So now, this goes on, stage 2 goes on for 18 to 30 hours approximately. And these numbers come from a couple of lager fermentations and a couple of ale fermentations. Limited data set, but you can probably chime in as far as what seems typical for you all.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, about 18 to 30 hours. Then the event occurs. The two fermentations mix. And the way this happens is that the cell count in the lower fermentation reaches about 18 to 20 million cells per mil, versus the normal count of say 50 to 75 in this period of time. The upper fermentation, which has been just going along full speed ahead, has started to slow. And it is now less exothermic, and the fermenter cooling starts to catch up with it.
Mm-hmm.
And with the result that it can actually cool to 2 to 3 degrees below the set point.
I've seen even more than that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got a lower layer, a bottom layer that's at the set point. Now you've got an upper layer that's cooled several degrees below the set point.
Mm-hmm.
And that yeast activity is slowing down. A little bit of flocculation is starting to happen. And now you're getting the CO2 evolution on the bottom layer starting to cause more turbulence. And we enter the event, the turbulent mixing of these two layers. You'll often, as a brewer, you'll often see a sudden change or increase in the carbon dioxide as this occurs as well, due to all this mixing.
Right. Big burst of CO2, violent activity all of a sudden. Sure.
Okay. Then we enter stage 4, the problem fermenter. Often this, that burp will happen overnight. You come in the next day, you check everything, and, gravity is not where you thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the fermentation's a little slow. This mixing often drives the temperature of the fermentation a degree or 3 below the set point as well. So you look at this fermenter and say, it's fermenting a little bit cold. I'm going to turn the glycol down or raise the temperature, decrease the cooling. This seems to be going a little bit slow. And the fermentation is homogeneous at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But due to the low cell count in the bottom
Mm-hmm.
and the rather aged cell count, if you will, at the top, we're at a net low cell count for the fermentation at this point in time.
Yeah.
So it is a problem fermentation.
Yeah, you don't have enough cells to really properly carry the fermentation all the way through. You may see lower attenuation. You may see longer ferments. You'll see different flavor development. You'll see a lot of little problems with this. And it could be, increased acetaldehyde, acetal, a number of things, that could happen from this. And so this is the problem fermenter, but obviously this has some impact on the yeast as well. If you're harvesting this yeast and you're carrying this forward, what happens then?
Yeah. Oh, that's the stage 5 of stratified fermentation. And this is, poor harvested yeast. Normally your day-to-day routine, you brew, you ferment, you harvest, you get ready to pitch to the next brew, in the next fermenter, and you just keep turning this over. You've got a number of turns per week or day that you plan to have.
Right.
Now you've got this slow fermenter that's not harvesting the same quantity of yeast that you're used to, kind of throws a wrench in the works. And what's also interesting about this harvested yeast is that its vitality and viability is greatly reduced, even by half from what a normal fermentation would be, which I'm sure is a real pain in the ass for you.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. This harvested yeast, when you do repitch it, due to its lower vitality, can take an extra 8 to 16 hours to ferment the subsequent batch. Mm-hmm. So now you've got a subsequent fermentation that's also impacted by this previous fermentation.
And then you start thinking, oh, this pitch is bad, or maybe, I got a bad pitch from the supplier, or maybe this is somewhere down the road, and you're thinking, oh, we're having problems with this yeast, time to repitch.
Yeah. You think of all the usual suspects when it comes to a sluggish fermentation, temperature, yeast health, and this and that, when really the cause was the stratification that had occurred in the previous batch, and how it affects the yeast, which I think is a really interesting realization for many people. That as a brewer, you're probably used to experiencing this from time to time, and you just chalk it up to, variability. But once you understand where the cause is, then you can stop cursing your supplier and say, we need to be more careful on our fills, and this will go away.
Right. No more, damn you, White Labs. Chris White. Oh my God. No more of that. I'll miss that. That's part of the entertainment for my day.
That's right. Yeah. Always helps to have a cause to blame. Yeah.
I gotta blame somebody.
Yep.
It's not me. It can't be. How is that possible?
You've got a track record. Yeah.
That's right. I find this fascinating, and I think it it explains a lot of things that I've seen over the years, including there was an instance where I think somebody was brewing a multiple batch of high gravity beer over multiple days, and they wanted a pitch of yeast from us. We give them a pitch of yeast, and then they're just like, well, it didn't turn out very well. It's like, it was the yeast you gave me. It's like, I wonder if, again, they had this stratification issue because, we were using the same pitch of yeast and we didn't have any problems at all. And we're like, what was the issue? And of course, again, they needed somebody to blame. And of course, it must be us because, we must have not given them the good yeast. We must have given them the bad yeast.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that to somebody. And generally, if yeast isn't good for fermentation, you're dumping it anyways. You don't hold on to bad yeast. It's not like we're in the Vegemite business or anything.
Right.
All right. One more short break. When we come back, we'll have more on the stratified fermentation, plus answers to some of the live questions after this.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking stratification and fermentation. And I do believe that, there are some homebrewers out there that are experiencing, something similar to this.
That could be.
I remember filling up, barrels, large, wood barrels with beer as well. And I imagine you can have a similar problem go on in that.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how important the mixing is. And others who have had trouble with multi-batch fermentation in the past. A lot of brewers, they're like, that doesn't work. I've had problems with that. And they think it's, their pitch of yeast, or they think it's, they blame
aeration,
a lot of different problems. And, this is much more likely, I think, because especially, when you're, trying to do this on a commercial scale, and, sometimes for some breweries, their flow out of their heat exchanger is, fairly slow, and it'll take them a couple hours to knock out.
Okay.
And, we're lucky that we set it up here so we can knock out, a barrel a minute. And, because we set up cold liquor, and, the heat exchanger is sized right, and we're able to hammer out, barrel a minute. We could do 2 barrels a minute, but go slower in order to get enough oxygen in there. But there are times when, somebody slows it down for one reason or another. Maybe there's a lot of material in the whirlpool and they want it to settle. And, it's the subtle little things of brewing that make such a big difference in the end product. And people don't really realize that. It's like, that one little thing you're doing, that's the thing.
Yeah. I have a presentation I frequently give on maturation, and it harkens back to what Dr. Lewis told us in San Diego at CBC many years ago. And that is, every time you change a factor in your fermentation, you've brewed a different beer. You had to brew the same beer, you got to have the same fermentation. And so this stratified fermentation is different, produces a different beer.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is fascinating. I think there's so many topics like this that, and a lot of us went from home brewing into commercial brewing and didn't go to commercial brewing school and, relied on the things that we could learn or the things we could learn from others. And it becomes, quite difficult. And these are very real problems that exist. I think, the MBAA is a great membership to have. There's such a wealth of information. I mean, if you have a problem, you can actually search the archives and find, papers written, 30 years ago, 50 years ago that actually address the very problem you're having.
That's right. Yeah.
It's well worth the money.
Yeah. So I have to agree. I'm a member. A member of the MBA, and I'm also the editor of the journal, which allows me to see a lot of these articles as they're published. But yeah, it really is a really deep resource of information. And the district memberships, if you go to the district meetings, they're like a brewing guild every month or whenever they have the district meetings. Sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's quarterly. You're, talking with other professional brewers like yourself, and regardless of scale, you all are often seeing the same kinds of issues and can teach one another and learn from one another. So it really is a great resource for people. And that's where I found this article on stratification that we're talking today. So I guess we should kind of get around to how do we fix a stratified fermentation.
Right. That's what I was going to ask is, is there a simple solution to this other than, a giant spoon and stirring it up?
A paddle. Yeah. Mixing is the key. The key is sufficient mixing. Homebrew scale. Yeah. You've got your spoon or your mash paddle or whatever that you can reach in there, stir that wort around in the fermenter and get everything homogeneous. When it comes to very large tanks, such as what you have, you often have your inlet port where you're pumping in the wort from the bottom of the fermenter. Depending on how full that fermenter is, how much back pressure there is, how strong the pump is, that wort velocity is going to vary. And when you have a very slow fill, that's when you don't get sufficient mixing. So one solution is to buy a stronger pump, or configure the nozzle such that it puts out more velocity. In one scenario outlined in the article, the fermenter was being filled through the racking port, and that racking tube pointed down towards the cone. Well, to address the issue, they turned it up to about a 10 o'clock position, and that directed the incoming wort up and around the vessel and aided the mixing of those two worts. And they were able to correct the problem that way, simply rotating the racking port. So there's a couple of different ways to address the issue. You could install sensors both top and bottom so that you know that, hey, my temperature at the top is different from the temperature at the bottom. We might have stratification and need to take steps.
Well, and I think, for the author, and this was at Anheuser-Busch in Idaho, I think, they collect their wort in a settling tank first and then pump it out of there into the fermenter. They're letting trub and all that drop out.
Oh, yeah.
they pump it over. So they were able to increase the velocity of their transfer. Whereas most, craft brewers our size or smaller, we tend to go right out of the heat exchanger into the tank.
Okay.
There is no intermediary vessel.
Okay.
And because of that, we're limited in how fast we can transfer because it's limited by the heat exchanger, just the throughput of the heat exchanger.
Yeah.
The chilling available. So, for us, I think it's, far more critical to, hook up to the racking arm, because a lot of folks will go in through the bottom port, which is just straight up the middle on the bottom. Okay. I think if you're pumping fast enough, you could get some good mixing. But, hooking up to the racking arm and then, going off at an angle so it shoots up the side wall, that could be real advantageous, I think.
Yeah. Is there a way, and I know when people talk about dry hopping and agitating the beer, when they dry hop, is there a way to circulate the wort in the fermenter after it's full?
Yeah. So one of the things that's being done nowadays, it's actually become quite common, is recirculating your beer through a hop bed or through a hop gun, hop cannon, something, a torpedo or whatever. So you're pulling the wort out or the beer out through maybe the bottom port or off of one of the ports up the wall or the racking arm, and then you put it back in, higher up, and get a mixing of your hops. So that's happening with hops, with various ingredients, fruit and spices and things like that, in order to fully extract that. And so that gives a lot of agitation mixing as well, but it tends to be done later in the process, towards the end of fermentation or after fermentation's done. Certainly could be done beforehand, but it's not something anybody does.
Sees a need to do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably, if those kinds of recirculation systems are becoming more common, that's probably the easiest way to address it, is when you just say, we're doing a multiple fill, after each turn, we'll run the recirculation a little bit, make sure it's mixed, and that should address it.
Well, and that's one of the things the author was talking about, maybe, fermenter manufacturers, could design something or construct equipment that has, better, or some sort of solution as to mix. Our tanks, they tended to come with, 4, temperature probes, one for every jacket up the side. And we're always like, we in a lot of cases have had them removed because it really just adds another shadow in the cleaning. Everything that in the fermenter, when you're spraying from above to clean the walls of the fermenter, it creates a shadow, and underneath that is all your protein and scum is going to build up, and so you're trying to clean worried about shadows, so you don't want a bunch of probes sticking in the tank that way. So there you go. They were also talking about doing sensors from above, and they didn't have the ability to just cut open the tank and stick extra probes in. So I'm sure what they did was they went to one of the top ports and did their instrumentation from there, and you could drop things down from the top into to check. On the tanks that we do have multiple temperature sensors, temperature ports up the side, we were thinking we could set and we did when we experienced this problem. We put in temperature probes up at the top and middle and bottom. Problem is wasn't the same tank. we thought, maybe, it's this tank. My guys were like, it's got to be this tank or, this tank. But it just happened all over the place, just randomly. It wouldn't happen that often, but every once in a while, it would just like pop up.
Yeah.
Like, well, why? And, part of it's temperature related, the seasonal temperature variations.
Right.
And then the other question was, well, why are we experiencing, such a large drop in temperature, and part of my thinking is, we keep our glycol quite cold. We're around 28, 29 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
And a lot of other places, when they're, they'll have glycol kept warmer for fermentation purposes, and then they'll have glycol that's kept really cold for, packaging purposes. Something like it as a bush facility may have two different temperatures of glycol, so maybe they don't experience this large drop when something like this happens. One of my other thoughts was, I wonder if it would be possible to just vary the speed at which you are pumping in, and would cause some mixing. I mean, one of the things that happens, when you're cleaning a keg is they vary the speed of the pump, and that allows for, more dispersal of your cleaning solutions.
Oh yeah.
And, I wonder if the same thing might happen, in the fermenter. I still think the best bet is to go through the racking arm and angle off to the side.
Yeah.
Allow that to run up the side where there's less resistance to mixing.
Yeah. That seemed to work very well for the craft brewery in Oregon that had experienced the problem that's mentioned in the article.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's our takeaway from this?
Well, if you're doing multiple fills and experience sluggish fermentations, then you're probably experiencing stratification.
Mm-hmm.
And once you understand that, realize that there is this cascading effect on your yeast health for subsequent brews. So if you are experiencing stratification, then figure out a way to mix and mix well, and that should cure it.
Right. I'm, how many others of these fascinating topics are out there that could be helping a lot of craft brewers?
Oh, it's probably hundreds.
Hundreds, if not thousands.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, who is very helpful for craft brewers, home brewers up in the Reno area is my friends at Brew Chatter.
Yes.
Me and Josh, wonderful folks. They've got a great shop there, great online experience as well. Wonderful people, kind and generous and knowledgeable. Go check them out next time you're up near Reno, or they're in Sparks, just Reno adjacent. It's part of the Reno metro area.
Right. Yeah.
But they got a great place. They even got a little bar in there. It's lots of fun to visit. Go check them out at brewchatter.com. All right, let's take one last break, and then we'll come back. We'll get some listener questions and stuff like that right after this.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. Let's see here.
Questions.
We have a question.
Okay.
William was asking, he says, my Anvil Foundry is arriving tomorrow.
Oh.
Should its first brew be a hazy, a black IPA, or a Rauch beer?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Yeah, the question, I need some additional information though before I can before I can give a true answer.
Okay. Yeah.
Are we invited to come and drink the beer? That's the question. Because
That's right.
so then we're going to choose which one we want to drink.
Right.
Otherwise, maybe it's what you would like to drink, William.
I was going to vote for the black IPA myself. But,
I would go for the black IPA, but we just brewed one, and so I'm a little black IPA out.
Sure.
I haven't had a Rauch beer in a long time.
Yeah.
That's one that I haven't had. Well, no, actually, I had somebody brought a bunch of bottles from Germany. Hazy, I have, pretty much every day.
Yeah.
Tough question. I would, that is a very tough question. I think maybe you just have a massive brewing session and you brew all three.
That's one idea. I was gonna say I would have warned against the hazy just until he experiences the mash and recirculation in the anvil with the higher adjunct levels of a hazy.
Because you can add a lot of oats, a lot of wheat.
Yeah.
Right.
Could be. I mean, I've done a hazy in my own anvil, worked fine. But on the other hand, that particular batch was not recirculated. It was simply a one-step, no sparge, drain and boil, and it worked quite well. But if you're going to be recirculating, then you may want to try a batch that flows a little easier, like the Rauch beer or the black IPA, just to get a feel for the system first.
Well, there you go. Right. Tell me about the Anvil Foundry. I mean,
sure.
Is that I'm not familiar with it. Is that a kettle? Is that a whole brew system?
It's one of these all-in-one brew systems, very similar to the original Grainfather. The Grainfather is a nice system. I brewed on that. It has an internal pump that does the recirculation, whereas the Anvil uses an external pump that sits outside. And my first thought when I saw that was, it'd be slicker if it was inside like the Grainfather.
Yeah, I like external.
Yeah. If an external pump clogs, it's very easy to
external.
Yeah, take it apart, clear it, put it back, and start over. When it's internal, you got to dump the batch, which is a real pain in the butt. So, the Anvil's a nice all-in-one. It can run on 120 or 220. Just flip a switch, change the plug if you have to. I have the smaller 3-gallon system, it's a 5-gallon vessel that can be used to brew 3-gallon batches. And that works just great on standard, 120 household. Reaches a boil in 20 minutes, works great. For the larger 10-gallon vessel, I think it is, to brew 5-gallon batches, you need the 220 to get a good vigorous boil out of their 6-7 gallons of wort.
How many amps of
15 amps, standard 15 amp breaker, but you just need the higher voltage to run that. But yeah, beautifully designed system, really easy to use. Just, punch a button to raise and lower the temperature. Really, really easy to brew on. And what I was really, I've like yourself, I've had, 3 vessels, gravity fed systems, 3 vessel pump systems, the Blickman top tier recirculation system, and so on. And I love the Anvil because there's so much less to clean up at the end of the day. It's just this one little vessel that you got to clean up versus 3 kettles and hoses and the heat exchange. It's all that. It's like, wow, okay, this was nice. Nice, short, simple brew day.
Well, and easier to store too, I would imagine.
Yeah, the footprint of it. I mean, when I'm brewing on it, I do it downstairs in the garage on the washing machine. Just set it up there. That way, if I spill wort, it's like, oh, it's it's the laundry room. But yeah, very nice system to brew on.
I'm all excited because I'm getting a little 5-barrel brew plant here
nice.
for the brewery, which to me that seems so small now. Back in the day, I would have thought 5-barrel. Oh, that's pretty good size. Yeah, I think it's just to me, it's just like a little homebrew size system to me now.
Yeah,
I'm all excited. It's coming. It's going to be my Christmas present.
Very nice.
Early December, we think. So that should be a lot of fun to set up. You'll have to come up and brew with us at some point.
I would love to. Yeah. What how are you going to use that? Is it going to be for just week to week experimentation, or?
Yeah. Be able to do one thing is when you work in a brewery like this, there isn't a lot of opportunity for you to come up with your own crazy recipe. For a lot of these guys, and they all want to be brewers. They're all interested in brewing, and we've got production to do, and when it's a new recipe and a new beer we're going to be doing, generally I'm doing it because the thing is it's a minimum of like 35 barrels. It's like 35 barrels of beer. That's a big ask to get rid of 35 barrels of beer if it doesn't quite work out. So I can't let people just go crazy. I try and work in their stuff. This will allow them to do a lot more because 5 barrels, I can get rid of 5 barrels in the tap room, no problem.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't turn out well, it's much cheaper to dump. And then there's certain beers that I just love, like an ordinary bitter. We've brewed 35 barrels of ordinary bitter before. And it goes okay, but we end up dumping some at the end. Whereas if I brew 5 barrels, it's like that's perfect. Just enough for me to drink, and then we'll brew more. Let's see. Todd is asking, would an inline aeration mix wort in the tank as the air rises inside, even after long turn times? So on the multi-batch, a question actually about what we're talking about. Yes and no. So, the rising of aeration, generally the purpose of aeration is to get everything absorbed into the wort. So a lot of times you're adding oxygen and you're waiting to see no bubbles at the end before it goes into the tank. And a lot of times people aren't adding additional air when they add additional wort to a multi-batch tank. So you could do that. You could probably even mix in CO2. You could do anything to kind of stir it up, but you'd need to be kind of violent. We've tried stirring tanks with CO2 before and with oxygen, and it really, it will do an okay job, but it really doesn't do a great job of mixing a tank. We found a lot of same problem adding water to a tank. We've done added water to a tank, and unless you pump that thing around, it is not mixed. You can try bubbling CO2 through it, not going to work. You have to pump it around. You have to use a pump. So that's part of the problem with that. Jonathan asks, at what point will thermal difference overcome specific gravity difference to break up stratification in a standard conical? Like not chilling the second batch as much and using thermal lift to mix the two batches. So go in warmer on the second batch. Would that help mix the two?
It would decrease the potential, temperature density gradient between the two worts. Mm-hmm. That would be a help probably. Hard to say, where, what kind of number to attach to that, and at what point, where that trade-off occurs between density and temperature that would encourage mixing versus prevent mixing. because there are several other factors, fermenter geometry, for example, and the way and the flow velocity and such that are going to also contribute to that mix and not mix.
Well, and
decision.
your gravity's already dropped due to fermentation. I mean, it depends at what point.
Yeah. Great question. It's the kind of thing that needs to be addressed at individual breweries.
Mm-hmm. There you go. All right. Great show. Great topic. If you're listening live, stay tuned. We'll be right back. You may get up and run to the little boys' room, but we'll be right back. And then we've got a show coming up for you about barrel aging based off of questions that have been sent in to the Brewing Network. So until then, which is in like 3 minutes, brew strong, everyone.